This happened during the fall semester of my senior year in high school. Every night after dinner with my family, I'd walk my dog Jessie down the street to a small field near our house. 2 things you should know. 1, my house is situated on a hill, and you have to walk over the top of it and all the way down to the bottom to get to the field. It's lined with trees and lots of street lamps, so it's pretty well lit, but it can still seem eerie at times. 2, Jessie is one of the most well-behaved golden retrievers I've ever seen in my life. She never barks at anyone, never runs off, and she never even chases squirrels, so I normally don't keep her on a leash while we're just walking down the street. Anyway, I started walking with her down our steps to the street, just like any other night. It was about 9:30 p.m., and the sun was long gone. We usually just walk down the middle of the road because not many cars drive through. Jessie wasn't on a leash, but she was right by my side as we rounded the top of the hill to go down, when all of a sudden, I saw a woman walking toward us in the middle of the road. We were at the top of the hill, and she was about halfway up, staggering in this weird, unnatural sort of way. She was walking almost as if she was a ghost out of The Grudge or some horrible Silent Hill character, but when I first saw her, I wasn't really scared, just more worried if she was okay. I thought maybe she'd been hit by a car and one of her legs was broken, but she was moving along at a jilted but steady pace. She had long black hair and a dark dress, and her skin was pretty pale in the street lamp's light. I didn't really know what to do or what to make of the scene. I just kind of stopped and stared at her, when suddenly, Jessie started running toward her barking like crazy. I'd never seen her bark like that before. I honestly feel like if someone broke into our house, she'd just go up to them expecting to be petted, but here, she was growling ferociously, almost like she was ready to strike. I chased after her, only catching up when she was right in front of the woman, basically barking in her face. The woman didn't react at all. She didn't jump, didn't put her hands out. She just stood there staring at my dog. I bent down, grabbing Jessie by the collar to pull her back. I was maybe 2 feet from the woman. I started apologizing profusely, but when I turned my head up to look at her, I stopped. I was crouched down, looking up at her with the street lamp shining down on the both of us. She slowly turned and looked down towards me without saying anything, and I immediately saw it. She didn't have a face. Not in the sense of her features were all mixed together and washed out. She literally had no face. It was complete nothingness, like looking into the sky and staring at the blackness between 2 stars. I could see her hair, I could see her neck, but I couldn't see a single feature between. I'm telling you, it was absolute and utter black, a void. I looked into it, stopped dead mid-apology as she looked down back at me without a word. After a few seconds of us just staring at each other in silence, she turned away and looked back forward, commencing to walk again. I let go of my dog's collar, more in surprise than anything, and immediately Jessie ran to the other side of the street. Chasing after her, I caught up and grabbed her collar again on the sidewalk. It couldn't have been more than 3 to 5 seconds, but holding my dog again, I turned to look back at the woman, and she had disappeared. At the rate she was walking at, it should have taken her at least 30 seconds to get to the top of the hill, but there was nothing. She completely vanished. At the time, this was weirdly the most unsettling part for me. What just happened? Did it even happen? My dog had reacted to her too, so I wasn't the only one who saw it. Slowly, I took Jessie the rest of the way down and watched as she ambled around the field. I spent the whole time looking over my shoulder, deeply afraid that something was going to sneak up on me. All night, I became more and more bothered by what happened, trying to rationalize it away. Maybe the way her hair fell blocked the light, but I would have seen something. The tip of her nose, part of her mouth, but there was nothing, literally nothing. I'm not religious, and the logical part of me doesn't believe in ghosts, but now I don't even know. I still don't quite believe in spirits, but I genuinely can't explain what happened that night. I've had some lesser encounters with weird phenomena, but this is the only time I've been within arm's reach of a so-called ghost. My girlfriend and I like to use recreational drugs sometimes. On Friday, July 29th, 2022, we used some uppers. The ones we use give you a rush of energy, but have no psychedelic or hallucination-inducing effects. We had a great time and slept it off the next day, both of us waking up late in the afternoon. We had a good breakfast, then watched some Netflix and chilled for a while. She lives in a studio apartment and has pet rats, so we can't smoke inside because they have sensitive lungs. The building she lives in has a public balcony, so that's where we'd go out to smoke about every hour or so. It was a small balcony on the second floor, with wooden railings and a stone floor overlooking the neighborhood. The building's rule was that nobody was allowed on the balcony after 10 p.m. We didn't really care about that rule, and neither did anybody else, so we'd smoke there in the evenings too. It was on Saturday night, July 30th, that we went for a smoke outside again. It must have been midnight. We were reminiscing about the day before. About halfway through our cigarettes, I suddenly heard a weird noise very far away in the background. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, and since we were having a conversation, I tried to ignore it, and it stopped after a couple of seconds. When our cigarettes were done, we were still just standing on the balcony talking, when I suddenly heard the sound again, and immediately asked my girlfriend to be quiet. As it was now quiet, I was able to hear it more clearly. After a few seconds, I realized what I was hearing, and I felt a cold chill running down my spine, like my soul got sucked down through the floor. My whole face went pale. I hear a woman screaming. She laughed at first and jokingly asked if I was high on something. I told her to shut up for a second and really listen. She noticed how dead serious I was, and she turned her ear towards the end of the balcony, and as she heard it, I saw her face turn just as pale. "That's a woman screaming," she said. Our first thoughts were that somehow we had taken some really bad drugs and had some kind of weird shared psychosis after effect. We immediately checked if we had any symptoms of overdosing or after effects. No sweats, no high heart rate, no fatigue, no crazy thoughts. Both of us were able to think and talk clearly. We concluded that the sound we were hearing, a woman screaming, was real. The reason this struck us so was because it wasn't a normal kind of scream. It wasn't somebody getting scared or mugged or whatever. This scream was different. It echoed. It carried a hopelessness in its tone. It sounded so vague and far away, like it was carried to us by the winds. The scream sounded like somebody screamed their soul out of their body and into the sky. Both of us were nailed to the floor, and we kept listening in silence. Soon after standing there, some group of loud teenagers were cycling home, probably from a bar or something, and screaming at each other. Both of us could finally breathe again. "Well, that was the logical conclusion. Just some loud teenagers," she said. I initially agreed, but when they were far beyond what we could hear, the screams came back again. The sound was even more desperate now. I didn't hesitate and immediately called emergency services. I explained to them what we had heard and addressed our concerns, and they told us they're sending a police car over. We were outside in the parking lot near the main entrance waiting for them, still hearing these faraway screams. The police arrived at 1:45. 2 officers, a male officer and a female officer, introduced themselves and asked us to explain in detail what we had experienced. We told them exactly what we had heard and where we had heard it from. The male officer didn't take it too seriously and tried to ease out of it by saying it was probably just mating frogs. Apparently they make a scream-like sound when mating. The female officer took us more seriously and stood with us listening. And very faintly, like whoever was screaming was running out of energy and time, we heard her again, and so did the female officer. She immediately contacted the station and they set out a search and rescue. We were thanked for reporting this and they left. For me, it wasn't done yet though. We sat back down on the balcony and kept listening. As we were sitting there, the night sky turned a pulsating blue from all the police cars driving around trying to find this screaming woman. We sat there just listening to the continued screaming, hoping it would stop when they found her. It must have been about 20 minutes later, almost 1:30, that the screams finally stopped. My hopes were that the police had found her and she was safe, but deep down I had a feeling that she wasn't. That Wednesday, I was at my mother's house for dinner. She lives in the same town as me. During dinner, I told her what we had experienced and how frightening it all was. My mother stood up without saying a word, walked over to the living room, grabbed that day's paper, and handed it over to me. The headline read, "Woman found dead under fallen tree." I was shocked. I felt my eyes filling up with tears and said with a shaky voice, "I heard this woman die." Against my better judgment, I kept reading. The 47-year-old woman was on a midnight walk in the woods last Saturday night when a tree fell over and crushed her legs. Local authorities believe the woman may have survived for several hours before succumbing to her injuries. She had been dead for almost 72 hours before she was found. The police refused to share further details as to her identity or passing. There was more in the article, but I could not and refused to read it through my tears. I did not have it in me to share this with my girlfriend out of fear how she would take it. But that's not the most disturbing part of all of this. I live alone, and sometimes when I'm in bed and can't sleep, at midnight, I can still hear her screaming. Sometimes my doorbell rings in the middle of the night, but when I go to check, there's never anybody there. I had a camera doorbell installed, and the only thing I caught on camera was the sound of my doorbell ringing. Sometimes I hear a weird knocking sound like somebody is banging on wood. Stuff in my house seems to relocate on itself, such as clothing, food, and tools. My fridge door sometimes opens by itself. Whenever I look at my kitchen door, it feels like something is watching me. My cat Robin seems to stare at nothing in corners and sometimes even gets a big tail and starts hissing at these empty corners. Ever since all that happened, my TV has this weird thing where it turns itself back on after I turn it off. It's only when I take the plug out of the socket that it stays off. All these things seem to only happen between midnight and 1:30. The most horrible thing is, I can hear her screaming when it's silent around me. I called my doctor about this because I thought I was going insane. She referred me to a team of therapists. After countless hours of talks and sessions, they confirmed that I suffer from no form of delusion, hallucinations, psychosis, or any other mental illness that could cause me to experience all this. But I still do. She still screams at me. Last night, on January 2nd, 2023, I heard her screaming and banging again. When I went to bed and shut the lights off, I kept having this feeling like someone was standing next to my bed watching me. And so I decided today, January 3rd, that I should write down this experience and share it in hopes that she may find some rest in the knowledge and she won't be forgotten. Since we never got a name, I simply call her the Screaming Woman. May she rest in peace. This is probably the creepiest, most unexplainable thing that has ever happened to me. I used to work overnight as a security guard at the local port. Usually none of the port workers would stay overnight except for the safety official. I wouldn't be on the shift alone, since the site is a radius of nearly 2 miles. Overnight, there would usually be 3 guards, including me. Since the area was fairly big, there were different posts, but the front gate was the main entrance area where all the guards would be stationed overnight since there was no need to put them in other posts due to the fact that there was no activity in the site at this time. The veteran guards that had been there for years would often say that the site was haunted, given the fact that there have been accidents and deaths that occurred in the area a long time ago. I was aware that people died there due to freak accidents, and I do believe in angels and demons since I'm actually a religious person, but I always thought that the superiors were just messing with the new guys. I would work 5 to 6 nights out of the week, and for the first few weeks, I never saw or heard anything out of the ordinary, except for maybe a few questionable creaks and would see a few misplaced objects while doing my patrol rounds, but nothing too crazy. Just to describe the setting to you, this is a fairly big site, and on occasions when there were big projects being constructed at the port, the workers would sometimes stay overnight. Due to the fact that there were times where port workers were required to stay at the port for a few days, there's a gym in the site for their convenience. This gym is fairly old. In the gym, there's a sauna, weights, and even a racquetball court. If you don't know what a racquetball court is, it's similar to an indoor tennis court with thin plastered walls and thick glass doors. Usually on our patrol rounds, me and one of the other guards, Mike, would stop by the gym and play a few rounds of racquetball before returning to the front gate. On one of those nights, me and Mike decided to hit a full workout instead of playing racquetball in the cage. It was around 2:30 a.m., and the entire building was so quiet that you could hear the electricity running through the lights. The air conditioner was off, and so was everything else. The only thing that was running were the lights. 15 to 20 minutes into the workout, we heard a loud thump. We crossed it off as nothing and continued working out. Then, after a few more minutes, we heard the loud thump once more. At first, we thought it was our lieutenant, who could have been walking around, but then we radioed him and he gave us his location, which was at the front gate. We tried thinking logically on what could be making those thumps on the wall. They were coming from the court on the other side. We thought it was the air conditioner, but then we remembered that it was off, and even when it switched on during the day, there were no reports of thumps coming from the air conditioner. After a few more minutes, the thumps started occurring one right after another. We were very creeped out at this point, but what we were about to witness still scares the absolute hell out of me till this day. We started to approach the other side of the gym to where the glass door was. We turned on the flashlight and aimed it towards the clear glass door, and I started shaking so much out of fear that I was about to cry. We saw one of the balls rolling slowly by itself inside the court, but there was no one in there. So that meant that the loud thumps were the balls mysteriously being tossed against the wall, as if someone or something was playing inside the cage. We were both so confused and frightened at how this was really happening. We couldn't make sense of any of it. We were both terrified, and we started running away because we knew that there was something probably evil toying with us right there. As we sprinted full speed back to the front gate, the lieutenant saw us and asked us why we were running in such a ridiculous manner. We told him what we witnessed, and his facial expression scared us even more. And he said, "That's why there's always guards that quit often. There's something evil in the area, and it's not the first time that something that bad has happened here." He then showed us security footage of dark figures and shadows literally passing through the office areas, and lights mysteriously switching on and off. Till this day, I still get chills recounting my experience with my friends and family, and I'm even getting chills right now as I'm typing this. I had never had a real encounter with the supernatural until that night. Many say that it was a demonic presence messing around. Others say it was a ghost of a dead person who died in the area. I don't know what it was, but I didn't last long in the job after that.